What's up guys, my name is Ace, and welcome to part 2 of my final review for Modern Warfare. This one is going to be focusing on everything that I feel they did wrong with this game. And it is a very long list, a very long video, as you can probably tell. So make sure you get some popcorn, sit back, relax, and enjoy it. Now, a few things to mention before we hop into the video here. First up, of course, this is going to be a very subjective video. I know a lot of you guys will absolutely love Modern Warfare and you don't want to hear anything negative about it. So if you can't handle the negativity about it or me just absolutely ranting about the things I don't like about this game, you're probably not going to like this video because I'm not holding anything back. But if you can handle that, even if you disagree with me, that's totally fine. I'd love to hear your perspective in the comment section down below. Also, this video is not going to be talking at all about Warzone. I consider Warzone to be a separate experience. It's not part of the paid game. It didn't come with the game at launch. So everything I'm saying in today's video is going to be primarily focused around multiplayer, although of course there will be a mention or two of Spec Ops as well. Also, one final thing, if you guys missed what I do like about Modern Warfare, I will leave a link to that video in the comment section down below. I don't think everything was bad about this game. I actually think most of the things outside of the gameplay were really good with this game. My problems are almost entirely related to the gameplay itself, and that's going to be the main focus of today's video. But with that, it's time to get into the overview before we get into the specifics here. When it comes to Modern Warfare 2019's regular multiplayer experience, so 6v6 or 10v10, that's regular Call of Duty multiplayer, this is the first Call of Duty game in franchise history that I legitimately don't like playing. With every single other Call of Duty game, even the ones that were lower on my list, I've at least enjoyed playing them, and I've liked them in their own way. I actually like the Call of Duty franchise so much, I've created a career around this franchise. So I'm a very dedicated Call of Duty fan, and I tried so hard to enjoy this game, but I just don't, and I never really have, at least when it comes to 6v6. I've been saying it since the beginning, or even before the beginning, when I got flown out to a pre-release event. I said straight up in my review after that I didn't enjoy the 6v6 multiplayer, and I stand behind that today. So let's hop into the details of this. I've got a long list of things, and keep in mind, with most of these things, individually they wouldn't be a problem. It's just the combination of all of these that really gets me with this game. And starting it off in no particular order here, this is footstep audio. In this game, if I'm not mistaken, this is the loudest bass footstep audio we've ever had in Call of Duty, and to top that off, this is the first time that I can remember at least that we don't have some sort of a perk to permanently dampen or even eliminate our footstep audio. What this means for the gameplay is it's going to slow things down considerably because any sort of movement beyond crouch walking or aim down sight walking is going to generate a good amount of footstep audio that enemies can easily pick up on, and especially in the higher skilled lobbies, which I tend to be in, pretty much every single person in those lobbies is going to have a great gaming headset, and therefore they can pinpoint your exact location very, very easily in this. And the only counters to this are, first off, like I mentioned, crouch walking or aim down sight walking, which significantly slows your movement down, and therefore it feels more like you're playing hide and seek than a fast-paced arcade-style shooter that Call of Duty is. Or the other option is the Dead Silence Field upgrade, which is a temporary use sort of thing that you have to charge up, and it only lasts for a short period of time. Or if you chain kills together, you can extend that for longer periods of time, but you have to be non-stop moving and pushing the fight in order to do that. So anytime you don't have that Dead Silence charged up, you're at a significant disadvantage if you want to be aggressive, if you want to push out, and if you want to move. And this goes completely against what made Call of Duty successful. Call of Duty was built on the fact that it's a fast-paced arcade-style shooter. That's a big thing that separated it from other FPS games on the market. And by having these loud footsteps, it also reduces the overall skill gap. And the reason for this is pretty simple. It doesn't really take any skill to hear somebody coming and pinpoint their location just because you heard them with your good headset. That's not really a skill, or at least it's not a difficult skill for anybody to pick up. And since the footsteps are so loud and there's no permanent dead silence available, this allows people to essentially rely on footstep audio alone as their primary source of awareness. They no longer need to have a really deep understanding of the map, or how to properly read a mini-map, or how to understand how the spawns work and read those spawns in real time while also dealing with immediate threats. These things are a higher level skill, and in the past, these are the areas that usually separated a lot of the more advanced players from the beginner players. Beginner players are usually using all of their mental energy just handling the immediate threats. They don't have that extra space to deal with the big picture on top of that. And it's not because they're dumb or anything, it's just they haven't put the time in and practiced and worked to get better in these areas. And this is where that skill gap really came in the past, and a lot of that has been eliminated with Modern Warfare just due to footstep audio. The less you're able to rely on those footsteps, the more you're required to actually start learning how the big picture works and how to read those spawns and how to read your minimap properly. And this was actually one of the bigger reasons that I didn't enjoy the multiplayer experience in Modern Warfare. I felt like anytime I was moving beyond crouch walking or aim down sight walking, I was being punished for that movement. Whereas people that weren't moving, they're rewarded for not moving, because not only are they not making footstep audio for other players to hear, they're also not hearing their own footsteps, which allows them to more easily hear other people's footsteps that are moving. So not only did it reduce the skill gap, it also heavily contributed to a much slower playstyle that I personally don't enjoy. But next up on my list, we have the minimap. Now, the game was initially going to launch without a minimap at all, and the only way to get it would be to put a UAV or a personal radar in the air. Thankfully, after massive backlash in the beta, they did decide to give us a basic version of the minimap by default. But with this version, you didn't get any red dots on the minimap itself when enemies were firing unsilenced weapons, unless your team had a UAV in the air or unless you had a personal radar in the air. Now with this, at the very least, I was happy that they gave us the minimap back, even if it was a watered down version of the minimap. Because for me, the primary use of the minimap is to see where my teammates are positioned so I can read the big picture, I can look for gaps, I can look for potential flank routes and things, and it would also allow me to read the spawns if the spawn design was actually good. So I am happy they at least compromised in that area. But I can't help but think that the game would have played better if we had a traditional Call of Duty minimap and if the suppressors were balanced properly with that. I understand that if they would have just brought the red dots back on the minimap, then literally everybody be using a suppressor because the suppressors were great in this game. That's the way they were balanced. They weren't balanced with the minimap in mind because that wasn't their initial design intent. But I do think if they would have had a normal minimap and suppressors were balanced accordingly, this would have also noticeably improved the pace of the game. People would have been moving around more because they would have been more confident because there's more information provided to them. They can see where enemies are located, at least some enemies while they're firing unsilenced guns, and they can make their decisions based on that. Now, some people would just chase those red dots, and that's fine. That's more of a beginner approach to that. Whereas the more advanced players use that information of those red dots on the minimap to make smart decisions about how they're going to approach situations. And they can also leverage those red dots to take advantage of the people that are just going to chase the red dots. So yeah, that's another complaint I had with this game. This one's not nearly as big as the footstep issue. At least they added the base minimap, and I'm happy enough with that. And at the end of the day, this one isn't a game breaker for me at all. But the next thing I want to talk about that does relate to the minimap, this is how they balance the ghost perk in this game. And the way they have it is Ghost is always on in this game. If you're using the Ghost perk, it's always on. And this means if you're using Ghost as well as a suppressor, you will never show up on the enemy minimap. And personally, I feel like Treyarch has innovated in this area in the past, and it's far superior with the way that they do it, where you have to be at least somewhat mobile to stay off that radar. And if you're just going to be sitting in a random corner, for instance, Ghost will deactivate for you after a certain period of time. Since Ghost is always on, there's really not much reason to not just sit in a random corner. Because not only will you never show up on the radar, you also get to take full advantage of that footstep audio because, like I said, you're not generating any footstep audio, so you'll be able to hear everything coming. In my opinion, this sort of playstyle was just far too easy to take advantage of and far too difficult to counter because we're not talking about a power position or something, somewhere where you'd expect an enemy to be. People would sit in completely random corners that you would never expect somebody to be sitting in because traditionally there'd be no utility for just sitting in that corner. I'm not saying it should be impossible to do that if that's how you choose to play. I just don't think the game should be actively encouraging and rewarding that. And this is yet another thing that contributes to that slower paced gameplay as well as it reduces the skill gap because doing that, sitting in a corner just waiting for someone to walk by and hearing them coming, that doesn't exactly take a whole lot of skill to be able to pull off, especially when there's very little counterplay to that playstyle. But moving on to the next thing, and we're sticking with that similar trend for right now at least, this is map design. The maps in this game, for the most part, were specifically designed to be porous to provide safe spaces for lesser skilled players. And those aren't my words, those are the developers' words. So they purposely implemented essentially hiding spots for people to use that playstyle that we just discussed. Hiding in certain areas, just waiting for an unsuspecting person that's actually moving around the map to walk by them. Additionally, with map design, they added doors to regular multiplayer. And with these doors, it essentially just buffed the camping playstyle. If you wanted to lock down a building, it's so much easier if you have a door protecting you because an enemy has to come through the door to first off just see you, and second, when they interact with that door, they're generally going to make a sound unless they approach it extremely slowly, which again, that just slows the overall pacing of the gameplay down for the people that want to be aggressive. These doors, among a ton of other design decisions, punish aggressive playstyles, and they reward people that want to just camp. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that all design decisions should be for aggressive players and it should punish camping harshly. I just think things were significantly weighted in the campers' favor in this game, and aggressive playstyles were punished far too harshly. Now, additionally, with the map design in this game, another issue I had on many of the maps, I'm not saying this is every map, but many of the maps simply had way too many windows, way too many angles that you had to cover at any given time, to the point where it's kind of stupid to even move from point A to point B because you can't really control your surroundings as you make that move. There are just too many angles for you to be thinking about at any given time, and it's just not possible for you to cover all of them. Traditionally, with Call of Duty map design, and I'm talking even in the Infinity Ward golden days way back in the day, we didn't have this many angles to worry about at any given time. There were often a few key areas you had to pay attention to, certain power positions or windows that were more popular, and you could use that map knowledge to have an educated guess as to where those enemies were going to be, but there weren't so many of them that it was impossible to even guess which window somebody was going to be shooting you from. And in a lot of the Modern Warfare maps, it felt like this was the case. If you go around the corner, if you want to cross a street, for instance, it's just not a good idea because you couldn't possibly control all of the angles. At that point, you're just taking a gamble, which again, contributes to that slower playstyle. Why would I risk crossing the street when I can just set up and wait for some other idiot to try and cross the street? Now again, just want to reiterate, this isn't all maps, and I think some of the maps in Modern Warfare were actually very well designed, and I like some of the maps. I just didn't like the general design philosophy they used with many of their maps. Now, moving on to the next thing that's very closely related to map design, they kind of go hand in hand. This is spawns. And when I talk about spawns, I'm typically referring to like team deathmatch and domination sort of spawns. And in my opinion, these are some of the worst spawns we've ever had in Call of Duty from a more competitive standpoint. I'm not talking about for super casual play for the players that don't even understand how the spawns work. For a lot of players like that, they don't even realize what's going on. It's just chaos all the time, and that's how their life is when they play Call of Duty. But for people that actually understand how spawns work and understand how to read spawns properly and understand how map control works and how important that is to winning a game, most of that stuff just goes out the window with this game, and this isn't normal for COD. Even the old COD games, I often see people saying with Modern Warfare, well, this is how they used to do it back in COD 4. No, not with spawns. This isn't how spawns have ever worked in Call of Duty. The main issue with spawns in this game is it seems that they increase the weighting really heavily towards spawning near a teammate. Now, on top of that, we still have the other variables like distance from enemies or waiting to a domination flag, for instance, which didn't really seem to exist in this game at all. And what this often meant is if one enemy player snuck through your lines and got behind you, for instance, any of their teammates that you kill are now going to spawn with them behind you. So now you're getting a weird split spawn situation where you think you have some containment, you think you're starting to gain that map control, and then boom, out of nowhere, you have a whole team behind you, and that spawn flip isn't something that was predictable like in previous Call of Duty games. In almost every other Call of Duty game, even if I were just to go back and play it right now, I could tell you the moment the spawn would flip. In Modern Warfare, it's often a guessing game as to when that spawn is actually flipping and where it's flipping to exactly. It takes a lot of that away, which again, this is all big picture stuff, and this is a huge part of the skill gap of Call of Duty, and it's one of the things I traditionally love about Call of Duty, is understanding that big picture. It's not just taking it gunfight to gunfight, I'm also looking at what's going on around the entire map at any given time, and the way they've handled the spawns in this game, it kind of destroys that. It really seems like they were purposely trying to take that away from skilled players because they didn't want them to be able to use that knowledge of the big picture to take advantage of the players that don't understand the big picture and don't even realize that there is a big picture. So it seems like they're just trying to dumb things down, randomize things as much as possible to take that edge away from skilled players so that the unskilled players are going to be protected as much as possible from them, which seems to be a very common theme with a lot of their design decisions. So yeah, with the spawns, basically it seems like they've done everything in their power to eliminate the concept of map control. And to be clear, there is a difference between map control and spawn trapping. I realize anytime I mention map control, people just say, oh, you just want a spawn trap. No. Map control, especially in the context of domination, this is where it makes most sense. It's all about holding your 2/3 of the map and leaving the other third of the map for the enemy players. This is and always has been the most effective way to win a game of domination in Call of Duty. And this is why going for that triple cap is almost always a terrible idea, because you randomize the spawns at that point, everything flips, and you end up losing 2 flags, and now you're only holding 1. So that's why map control is such an important concept in Call of Duty, and it's a huge part of Call of Duty. Spawn trapping, on the other hand, this is where you are able to push the enemy team back so far that they have no options coming out of spawn, to the point where you're just shooting fish in a barrel and they don't stand a chance. They don't get their 1/3 of the map that gives them multiple decisions that they can make for trying to break out of that and regain map control over you. You're literally trapping them in place and giving them no way out. I totally agree that that shouldn't be happening and spawns should flip at that point. And a well-balanced spawn system knows when to trigger that flip. And it's usually at a pretty obvious point where you know you've completely eliminated all their options to come out of spawn, and therefore it's going to flip and they're going to be spawning on the other side of the map. In Modern Warfare, it really seems like not only were they trying to combat spawn trapping, which again, I'm on board with that, it seems like they also wanted to eliminate map control, which I am against. Now, I was about to move on from spawns, but then I just remembered a couple other things I hated about the spawns in this game. First up, they added a respawn delay to most respawn game modes, which I think doesn't really fit with Call of Duty. Call of Duty doesn't traditionally have that in most of their game modes. In some modes, like Capture the Flag, they will, but it makes sense for that mode since you have to actually get into the enemy spawn, take a flag, and get out of there. But in Team Deathmatch or Domination, there is no reason to have a spawn delay in Call of Duty, and it just slows the overall pace of the game down, which I find to be frustrating and completely unnecessary. And then on top of that, we have that fly-in animation, where you're hovering up in the sky, and then once your spawn is chosen, it starts flying in to the point where you're going to be spawning. Once that fly-in animation begins, and it starts actually flying down onto the map where you're going to spawn, your spawn point is locked in at that point. This means that might have been a good and safe spawn when that fly-in animation started, but it might not be by the time you actually spawn in. Couple that with the fact that there is a small weapon animation when you spawn in, and this has led to several situations throughout the year where you literally can't fight back because your gun isn't ready to go coming out of spawn, and yet the enemy has just come around a corner and they've already got eyes on you, and you're dead. So yeah, those are a few things that were just completely unnecessary additions to this game, and I think the game would have been so much better off without them. But next up, let's transition into Killstreaks. I don't like that we have Killstreaks by default, and if we want to use score streaks, we have to use a very valuable perk slot in order to get Point Man, which gives us the option to have score streaks. In my personal opinion, for objective game modes at least, score streaks are far superior to kill streaks. Score streaks actually encourage and reward people for playing the objective, and a kill on the B flag, for instance, of domination, is worth so much more than a kill in some random insignificant corner of the map that doesn't actually help your team win the game at all. With the kill streak system, a kill is a kill, and objectives don't mean anything. And this means it's often much safer to stay away from any sort of objectives, because that's where the danger is, and just get kills in some random insignificant area of the map. This led to far too many games where it seemed like I was literally the only person on my team that even knew that the B flag existed, for instance. I honestly felt like playing the objective in this game was kind of useless. It was kind of a dumb idea to play the objective, because wins at the end of the day, who cares about wins? It's all about whether you enjoy yourself, and a lot of that enjoyment comes from kill streaks and earning those kill streaks and using those kill streaks. So the obvious choice for most people is to not care about the objective, not care about the win, and just care about their streak. With score streaks, it actually encourages you to play the objective, and you're rewarded according to how much you actually contribute to winning the game. Now, at the very least, I wish they would have implemented point streaks like from Modern Warfare 3, where it's still a kill streak system, but you could also get a point for capturing a flag, for instance. So it would be equal to a kill. I don't like that as much as score streaks, but it would have been at least somewhat of a compromise. Ideally, what I really would have liked to see is just let us choose between kill streaks or score streaks without having to use a perk. Just let us toggle it either way. If we want to use kill streaks, we can use kill streaks. If we want to use score streaks, we can use score streaks, and we don't have to sacrifice one of our most valuable perk slots in order to do that. On this same topic of kill streaks, I have a few other issues with this system. First, I didn't like the fact that you couldn't loop through and earn multiple sets of streaks in a single life. So if I wanted to run some lower to mid-tier streaks, let's just say I wanted to use a UAV, a cluster strike, and a Harrier, or VTOL. Once I earn a VTOL, I have to die before I start earning another streak again. And to me, this doesn't really make a ton of sense because it's still going to require just as much effort to earn that next UAV. It's still going to take you that 4 kills to earn the UAV. So why not just let us keep our streak going and allow us to earn multiple sets of streaks in the same life? How is that any different from me throwing a C4 at my feet, blowing myself up, getting 4 kills and getting UAV? I guess the only argument I could really see here is they wanted to make it more difficult to get a nuke, maybe? I don't know. It's not like there were that many nukes going off in regular multiplayer because of the skill-based matchmaking system, which, don't worry, we will be getting to that more toward the end of the video because it sort of ties everything together. I've got a plan with it. Don't worry. But yeah, I just don't like the fact that you can't keep earning streaks in the same life like we normally can in Call of Duty. But finally, one last issue I had with the kill streaks is I just felt a lot of them were very weak and they never got the appropriate buffs. Just as a few examples, the support helicopter. That thing's just useless. That gets shot down instantly. I think at most I've gotten like 2 or 3 kills with it, and it's a higher end streak. It's not a low streak. I get way more kills with a precision airstrike on average than I do with a support chopper. So that should have received a buff a long time ago, but it never did. Also, the cruise missile, I just feel like it takes you out of the fight for way too long. There's that huge animation at the beginning, and you have to wait for all of that to take place before you even actually start controlling the streak. And that just felt terrible. It took you out of the fight for so long that I just never bothered using a cruise missile. It seemed like there was no point. And then there's also, like, the sentry gun, for instance. It was just not that good. It just didn't lock onto people fast enough, and it rarely got any kills anytime I've used it. So yeah, those are my main complaints with the kill streaks, but circling back to the idea that people weren't really incentivized to play the objective, this brings me to the next thing that I didn't like about Modern Warfare, and this is the mounting. More so just the camo challenges around mounting weapons. Now, the mounting mechanic itself, I could take it or leave it. I don't despise it, but I kind of prefer a game without it just because it can make you so laser accurate that you melt people instantly from like across the map with a full auto gun. But again, that's not really that big of a deal. To me, the bigger deal was the fact that these were camo challenges and it required you to get quite a few mounting kills with almost every gun in the game if you were going for the camo challenges. Which a lot of people do. That's a big part of Call of Duty for a lot of people, is grinding out that master camo, which was Damascus in this case. Now, the thing I hate about this camo challenge specifically is the fact that it forces you to play in a certain way in order to get those challenges completed, and this playstyle, in my opinion, isn't healthy to the overall gameplay experience for anybody involved. So first up, most of the time if you're going for these mounted challenges and you're trying to do them as effectively as possible, you're not really helping your team out at all. You're not trying to play the objective or anything. You're more likely to mount in some area that's nice and safe toward the back of the map and just wait for some sucker to run into your line of sight. Then we look at it from that sucker's perspective. That's really frustrating to die to somebody that's just mounted in some weird random spot on the map and they just melt you instantly because they have like no recoil at all. And there's really not much you could have done about that situation. You couldn't really dodge their shots or anything because they're just so laser accurate. So it's frustrating to die in situations like that as well. But then there's also your perspective. As the person doing those camo challenges, I just find them to be very tedious, and I don't find it to be very fun to play in that way. The entire time I'm doing it, I feel guilty that I'm letting my teammates down. I feel kind of guilty with the kills that I'm getting because I don't feel like I really earned them with some special skill that I have. I'm just literally pre-aiming a lane and pulling the trigger when someone walks into my sight. And I would just much rather have challenges that don't limit you to standing still in one spot. I would much rather have challenges that encourage a bit of movement or maybe some objective play. I think it would have been much better to replace those camo challenges with getting kills on or near an objective, for instance. That would have been very healthy for the ecosystem of the game, but instead they had these mounted kills, and I think that actually hurt the game a decent amount anytime you were playing with or against people that were going for Damascus. But next up on my list, something that I absolutely despise about Modern Warfare's multiplayer experience is the fact that lobbies disband after just about every game, and there is no ability to vote for a map. This is all integrated with their quick play system, and basically the way this works is once you finish a match, most of the time it's going to pull you out of that lobby and it's going to start searching for a different lobby. I absolutely hate this system, and I feel like it takes a lot away from the gameplay experience. I've talked about this a little bit in my Cold War reviews as well, because it looks like they might be going this direction with that game as well, which is really frustrating. But I feel like this takes away from the game in many different ways. First up, just the social aspect of it. You can no longer stick with the same lobby for hours at a time and joke around with the other people that you're playing with that are just random people on the internet, and you just want to kind of mess around, developing rivalries against them, trash talking a little bit, and maybe even meeting some new friends. I know tons of people that have met friends this way, just by talking to random people in lobbies, and that doesn't really happen anymore when lobbies are just disbanding after every game. I also think this actually leads to more toxicity in the games, because you can be as toxic as you want to the people you're in a lobby with right now, because they're going to be gone in the next lobby anyway. There's no repercussion for that. You're not going to be sticking with those people and playing with them across multiple lobbies. You'll probably never see them again, and I feel like that's one of the reasons people are even more toxic in Modern Warfare than in other games. But then there's also the gameplay side of it. I personally really like learning how the various people in my lobby are playing and adapting to them over multiple games. Or another thing that happens is sometimes you get a really good lobby where it's really close matches and they really come down to the wire after every game. I love sticking in those lobbies because there's that more long-term rivalry that you form, and it's like, oh, they just barely beat me in that last game, but I'm going to switch a few things up because I noticed they're doing this with their gameplay, so I'm going to switch a few things up with my gameplay in order to counteract that playstyle, and I'm going to get the win against them next game. I love that aspect about Call of Duty, and that was completely taken away with this system where they're automatically disbanding lobbies. They've taken the player choice away. Now, many people will claim this is the way it has to be because of the quick play system, and if that's the case, I would say they might as well just scrap the quick play system because it's hurting more than it's helping. But I think the more likely reason this is happening is due to skill-based matchmaking. And this is where we're going to transition into the skill-based matchmaking talk. And I want to make sure that I'm really thorough here. This is going to be a long section of the video because there is a lot to explain with skill-based matchmaking, and I want to make sure I get all of my points out there. And the first point I want to make here is most of the things that I hate about Modern Warfare that I've talked about up until this point are things that are specifically included by the devs in order to lower the skill gap and protect newer players from skilled players. It seems like they're trying their best to keep skilled players in check so that they don't go too hard on the new guy and the little guy that's just trying to get into the game. And I totally understand that mindset from the developers, and most Call of Duty games have some elements that reduce the skill gap and allow the game to be more accessible to newer players or lesser skilled players. Now, normally it's not nearly to the same extent as Modern Warfare, but on top of that, they are double dipping here by also having strict skill-based matchmaking in this game. What's the point of protecting newer players with gameplay design decisions that water down the gameplay at higher levels of play if you're also going to be protecting those new players with a skill-based matchmaking system? It makes absolutely no sense. Either you're a super casual game that's super accessible to low-skilled players and there's not much of a skill gap, but everybody plays with everybody, or design the game from the ground up to be as competitive as possible with a super high skill gap and then matchmake based on skill in order to protect the low-skill players from the high-skill players that will be so significantly better than them when the game is actually designed competitively. This is why skill-based matchmaking, even in regular public matches, makes so much more sense in games like Overwatch or Rainbow Six Siege, because those games were designed from the ground up to be competitive experiences. Whereas Call of Duty has always been more on the casual side of things, and a lot of their gameplay decisions very clearly show this, and therefore it doesn't make sense to be strictly matching people based on their skill level in regular public matches. Almost all of the issues that I've mentioned up until this point about Modern Warfare are only amplified by having a strict skill-based matchmaking system on top of this. So if we go back and take a look at footstep audio, for instance, in my lobbies, almost every single person in the lobby is going to have a very high quality gaming headset, and they're going to be very good players. Therefore, I can't get within a certain radius of them without them hearing me coming first so they can pre-aim and even pre-fire me as I come around a corner. Contrast that with the average player or a below average player out there. Many of you watching this will be in those groups. In those lobbies, yeah, you're going to get some people with some decent headsets that are going to be able to use those effectively to pinpoint sound, but it's not going to be like every single person. And I really noticed this when I was doing my skill-based matchmaking testing with multiple accounts. When I was on the lower skill account that I was doing testing with, I could really easily just mess with people. I could run right up behind somebody. They wouldn't hear a thing. They wouldn't have any idea what was going on. I could run around freely like I'm used to in Call of Duty because I wasn't being heard by every person on the map and they weren't just pre-aiming based on my footstep sounds. And that's just one element. That's just that footstep element. When you add all of these elements up, you're basically playing a completely different game in one type of lobby compared to a different type of lobby. And if you're a lower skilled player, you probably have no idea what the gameplay is like at those higher levels of play. This game doesn't play well at the high levels of play because it has all these skill gap reducing elements, and when you mash a bunch of skilled players together, when there's a bunch of cheesy low skill gap elements involved, then it's just who can exploit these mechanics the best. And that I find to be very, very frustrating. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. The next problem I have with the skill-based matchmaking system is it's actually more of a retention-based matchmaking system. When you really look at it, the way this works, based on the many, many hours of testing that Drifter and I did, is it's primarily based on your recent performance. So if you've had a string of really good games, it's going to bump you up into a harder lobby so that you can get stomped on a little bit and push back down into the lower skilled lobbies. The way I see this is it's working kind of like a modern day slot machine in order to keep you around for as long as possible. The way slot machines work is they're designed to pay out a certain amount over time, obviously less than they're taking from you, in order to keep you hooked. They want to keep you hooked for as long as possible, so they got to give you those little spikes, those little dopamine spikes every now and then by giving you a little win here or there, so that you're more likely to stick around for longer. This is pretty much exactly how this skill-based matchmaking system is working in this game. So it's not based off of your actual skill level. It doesn't take your overall stats, for instance, and try to find an actual elo score for you so it knows where to place you properly. Instead, it's constantly adjusting with your recent performance. So it tries to ensure that you don't perform too well for too long, because that will be coming at somebody else's expense. If you're stomping on the other players in your lobby, well, now it's got to be your turn to get stomped on a little bit, and maybe it'll bump them down so that it's their turn to stomp on people lower than them for a little bit. It's all about making sure that it gives you just the right amount of excitement and dopamine out of that, without really allowing you to perform consistently or really improve all that much over time. And even if you do improve, how do you know you're improving? There's no rank whatsoever attached to your name, and therefore, how do you even know if you're playing in a high skill lobby or a low skill lobby aside from just guessing based on how good the enemies are or how good they appear to be? How do you know when you have an amazing game that it wasn't just the game sort of pitying you and giving you that one win to keep you hooked for a little bit longer? Or on the other end, when you get absolutely stomped on, did you suddenly change something up that made you suck at playing the game? Or did the game give you a much harder lobby? Your entire gameplay experience is being manipulated in the background by this system, and you have nothing to show for it. And that I find to be really frustrating. If we at least had a rank that we could grind for, that would be great. And this is where skill-based matchmaking, or strict skill-based matchmaking in Call of Duty, belongs, in a ranked play system, which Modern Warfare doesn't have. They added these CDL playlists, but it's not an actual ranked play. It's just a playlist with the rule set for CDL, so you don't know where your skill level stands when it comes to that. And yet, it often feels like you're playing in ranked play in regular public matches due to how strict this skill-based matchmaking system is. And this brings me to my next issue with skill-based matchmaking. When you are in the higher skilled lobbies, if you are a really good player traditionally in Call of Duty, for instance, and you generally perform very well, once you get stuck in those upper tier lobbies, you pretty much have to use a certain handful of weapons and playstyles if you want to just keep your head above the water. There's not very much room for variety. There's not much room to mess around and challenge yourself in some weird, unique way, like going knife only, for instance. I mean, you could do that and do that for several games so you're effectively reverse boosting yourself down to the lower skill lobby, so then you can suddenly do really well going knife only. But that leads me to the next point, which is this entire system is way too exploitable. And this is frustrating as a content creator because, since it is exploitable, first up, there are going to be other content creators that are exploiting this and therefore getting these insane gameplays that are totally unrealistic if you're not reverse boosting for these lobbies. And then on top of that, even if you don't reverse boost, anytime you do get a good game, you're being accused of reverse boosting. And I've been accused of reverse boosting so much this year, and I don't do it. I have no interest in doing that. I don't care about this game enough to reverse boost in it. So that is just another thing with this skill-based matchmaking system that I find to be so frustrating. And for anybody that says all you want to do is stomp on noobs all day, that's why you don't want strict skill-based matchmaking, actually, with this system, if that's all I wanted to do, it's easier than ever because all the noobs are together in one lobby instead of just the odd one being mixed in with the random matchmaking. So yeah, when it comes to skill-based matchmaking, I don't just want to stomp on noobs, I want variety. I want a good mix of players. I want most lobbies to consist of average players with some above average and some below average players mixed in there, just like we are normally used to in Call of Duty. And I know skill-based matchmaking has always existed to some extent in Call of Duty, but it appears the system they used to use was more of a protected bracket for the lowest of low-skilled players, and then everybody else is just in the mix with each other. And I'm totally on board with that sort of system, and I'd love for that to return. I'm all for protecting the brand new players, the people that are playing the game for the very first time. I want them to enjoy themselves and get hooked, and I want the player base to grow because of that. So I'm totally fine never playing against those people. However, outside of that, I don't feel there should be any sort of this strict skill-based matchmaking in public matches. That should be reserved for a ranked playlist, which I also think should have existed in Modern Warfare. Now, circling back, there's another huge issue with this skill-based matchmaking system that I didn't mention yet, and this is playing with friends, especially if your friends are a significantly different skill level than you are. And this one really hits home for me. Before Modern Warfare, I had a group of people that I played with just about every single day in Call of Duty, and we always had a great time playing together, and we were a pretty good mix of players. Once Modern Warfare launched, suddenly a few people in the group were having a terrible time playing the game, but they noticed it was only when they were playing with me. When they would play by themselves without me in the equation, without me in the lobby, they actually told me it was like they were playing a completely different game. They would clearly be in a different skill bracket compared to when they joined up with me, and I just hate that so much. We used to have such a good time playing together, but now apparently there's too much of a gap in our skill levels, and therefore we can't have an enjoyable experience playing the game together. And that is just ridiculous to me, and I feel like that's one of the stronger arguments as well, that even the pro skill-based matchmaking people probably don't have a good argument against this. Are you saying that I shouldn't be able to play with my friends in public matches? We're not talking about a ranked playlist. We're talking about regular public matches. Should we not be able to have an enjoyable experience playing together just because there's that much of a skill difference between us? The whole thing is ridiculous in my opinion, and these are the main points as to why I despise strict skill-based matchmaking in public matches with no visible skill rank whatsoever. But moving on from skill-based matchmaking, the rest of my list here is just a bunch of things that are generally non-gameplay related, or at least not directly related to gameplay, and for a lot of them, I can just kind of list them off fairly quickly. First up, the file sizes. Holy crap, this game fills up a hard drive quickly. At least now, I believe you can uninstall various packs, like if you don't want the campaign installed anymore, you can uninstall it and everything. But at the end of the day, the file sizes are absolutely massive for this game. Next, there's no prestige system in this game, and your ranks get reset with every season. So therefore, you don't get that sense of long-term progression, or at least you don't get that sense of long-term prestige, because the number that appears next to your name that everybody sees, that's just your seasonal rank. It's not your career rank. Now, I know you can go into the menu and you can find your career rank. I understand that, but that's like hidden away in a menu that only you can see. A big part of prestiging in the past was the fact that you had this thing next to your name all the time and everybody else could see that. But I believe they wanted to eliminate that because they didn't want to scare away new players. Which, again, that goes with their entire design philosophy with this game. And a big thing with this system is I literally don't care about XP at all while playing Modern Warfare. Why should I care about getting to rank 155 if I'm just going to get set back to 55 the next season? It means nothing to me. And speaking about XP, the way they handle double XP tokens in this game is also so frustrating. It happens in real time rather than gameplay time. So if I activate a 15-minute double XP token, the clock starts ticking immediately, even while I'm in lobbies. If I have to take a break between games, maybe something happens in real life and I gotta go handle something, too bad, the clock's ticking and I'm wasting that double XP token. Whereas in previous Call of Duty games, when you activate double XP, it counts in-game time only, not menu time, or not time if you need to take a break from the game, for instance. After that, let's talk a little bit about the communication from the developers. This has been pretty rough this year. Now, I understand early on, the developers got a lot of backlash, and there were some death threats and stuff, and I don't condone that at all. I think that's terrible. But at the same time, I feel like that doesn't excuse not having proper communication with a community with a game this size. Now, I think what they could have, and probably should have done, is communicate more from an official channel rather than their personal channels. That way, any sort of death threats or anything, it's just going to a company. It's going to an entity rather than a person. So at least that would avoid some of that. But mainly with this, I just felt like we didn't get too much communication as to what their plans were and what was going on. Yes, we got like the season roadmaps and stuff, but when it came to weapon changes or gameplay design decisions and why they chose something over something else that seems like it would be so obviously better than what they chose, we didn't really get much communication when it comes to that. And I find that to be especially strange because in their previous game, Infinite Warfare, they were amazing with this. They did live streams, I think every 2 weeks, where they would just talk about the game and talk about a lot of the issues that the community has been talking about. And it seems like with Modern Warfare, that just completely disappeared. And then going along with this, their patch notes were terrible this year. And it's not that we didn't get relatively frequent patch notes, we did. The frequency was fine. It's the quality of the patch notes. There were so many gameplay-related changes, like weapon balancing changes or other changes that directly affect the gameplay that were literally never mentioned in a patch note. And it took me or someone else in the community stumbling across this at some point in order to find this change that was made behind the scenes. And this wasn't just an isolated thing where it happened every now and then. For a good stretch, it was happening with every single title update we had, or just about every single title update, where there'd be some fairly noticeable changes that were just not mentioned at all, which is ridiculous. Then the changes that were mentioned, most of the time they were really vague. So first off, they wouldn't give you any actual numbers, which is the preferred thing for them to do. It would be great if they said, we changed the aim down sight time from 200 milliseconds to 250 milliseconds, for instance. But on top of this, a lot of the times the descriptions for things they changed were really ambiguous, and it could go either way. So you don't even know if it was a buff or a nerf because of how they worded things. So it just didn't make any sense. It didn't provide any clarity as to what was going on. And then on top of that, with many of the patch notes throughout the year, they were just wrong. They were backwards. Like, they would specifically state that they improved the aim down sight time of a gun, but they actually hurt the aim down sight time of that gun. Or they would say they nerfed the movement speed a little bit, but it turns out they buffed the movement speed a little bit. There was far too much of that going on. And I mean, if it happened every now and then, that's fine. The problem is it was happening almost every update. It was just constant. And I guess it was really good for me and my content because it forces everybody to come to me if they want to know what actually changed in the game because the patch notes are so unreliable. But I just don't think that should have been the case with a company this size. But moving on, another big issue I had with this game was the way that they handled crossplay. Now, don't get me wrong, I like that they implemented crossplay, and that was definitely in part 1 of this series with what they did right. So I'm not saying they shouldn't have done crossplay, I just think it could have been done better. First up, the only platform that had the option to disable crossplay was PlayStation, which I honestly think that should have been available on any platform. Second, I think they should have tried to be more strict with input-based matchmaking, so try harder to put mouse and keyboard players against mouse and keyboard players and controller players against controller players, regardless of which platform they're on. And then also a huge issue I had, this one was mainly in Warzone, and I know I said I'm not going to talk about Warzone, but it did end up spilling over to multiplayer a decent amount, is hacking. This is something that as a console player, I'm just not used to dealing with this. And it's just one of those negative side effects of having this crossplay available. And I really feel like for a company this size, Activision is one of the biggest gaming companies in the entire world. They have so many resources at their disposal, and that was the best job they could do against hackers. That's just not good enough in my opinion. I don't think they did nearly a good enough job of dealing with hackers in this game, and they really should have had a much better anti-cheat system in place. But with that, there's one last thing I wanted to mention in this video that is more of a general thing. It's not really a specific aspect, but a big general thing that I feel Modern Warfare did wrong is they strayed too far away from what Call of Duty is. I've seen a lot of people say, no, they've actually gone back to what Call of Duty used to be back in like the COD 4 days or the Modern Warfare 2 days. And while I do see some elements where that is true, when you look at the overall way that this game plays in comparison to COD 4 or Modern Warfare 2, it's not even remotely close to the same thing. And on top of that, it's not even remotely close to any other Call of Duty game that's come out. And don't get me wrong, I do think innovation is good, and I think in a lot of ways they really push things forward for Call of Duty. I just think it's unfortunate that they changed a lot of the core aspects of the gameplay to the point where this doesn't really feel like a Call of Duty game in many ways. And coming from a really dedicated Call of Duty fan that has loved every Call of Duty before Modern Warfare, it kind of felt like they were purposely trying to push me and people like me away in order to attract newer players. And from a business standpoint, I think this was very successful. They attracted a lot of brand new players or players from other franchises because they branched out so much away from the Call of Duty formula that it attracted those players that previously didn't like the Call of Duty experience. And they also kept the lower skilled and the casual players around longer than ever before. So I have kind of mixed feelings about this. In some ways, I'm happy to see the franchise thriving. I'm happy to see a lot of fresh blood coming into the franchise. But on the other end of that, does that really matter to me if the franchise becomes unrecognizable and it loses all of the things that made me love it in the first place? So that's something that I have had to come to terms with throughout the year. I understand this game was successful. I understand a ton of you guys like it, especially you guys that aren't really dedicated Call of Duty fans. You really love this game. I just wish that I could have enjoyed it as well. I wanted to enjoy it so much because they have done so many great things for the franchise here. But when it comes to the gameplay, I quite simply didn't enjoy it. And with that, that's finally going to wrap it up for this video. I think this is the longest video I've ever made on this channel. But of course, I want to hear from you guys. Let it all out. Rant away. What did you not like about Modern Warfare? What do you feel they did wrong? Just let me know all of those thoughts in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.